Okay, I think we're just about ready to get started. So if I could just begin, please. My name is Ingrid Miley, and I'm going to be chairing your proceedings today. I'd like to thank QQI for asking me to do so. Looking through the agenda for today, I have to confess I'm a bit of a neophyte on a lot of the topics, but I'm certainly looking forward to a day where I think I'm going to be leaving this event better informed to a significant degree than I am as I arrive here. The title of today's conference is The Digitalisation Agenda, Rethinking the Role of Qualifications and Skills. A big mouthful, but I'm sure that when we break it down into bite-sized morsels, we're all going to have a far better insight by the end of the day. Before we go any further, I'd just like to deal with a couple of housekeeping issues. First, I would ask you to check for your nearest emergency exit so that you'll be prepared in the unlikely event of any kind of emergency. I would also appeal to you to put your phones on silent out of respect to the speakers. There's nothing more distracting than phones ringing, and our speakers have put a lot of work into their presentations, and I think we should all respect that. But however, please do leave your phone on, as we'd love to hear from you during the day. On Twitter, the hashtag for the day is #DigitalQQI. And if you have any queries about today's proceedings, you can talk to any of the QQI staff. They're the ones wearing the orange lanyards, and they're available to deal with your queries. Now, I know we're all in for a treat in terms of the high level of contributions on a topic which is at the cutting edge of potential transformative change, which is looming not just in education and qualifications, but across all business and social sectors. Now, much of the language around the digitalisation agenda can be very intimidating for some of us, especially somebody that's talking right now. But I am sure that by the end of the day, much of the jargon will have been demystified, and we will have a clearer picture of the opportunities and the challenges posed by digitalisation. Now, the reason you're all here today is because this is an area of relevance to each of you. In other words, you can't afford not to be interested. Now, today's contributions will cover a broad range of issues relevant to education, skills and qualifications, including the policy landscape underpinning the latest developments, with speakers from outside Ireland bringing an international dimension to this event. Some will be highly technical, while others seek to bring that technology down to the level of individual students, employees, employers and job seekers as they make their way in today's knowledge society and in the context of lifelong learning. Now, while we do have a very packed agenda, where possible, I hope to open the discussion up to the floor. And at that point, I would strongly recommend that you take the opportunity to put questions to our panels. These are experts in their respective fields, and you may not get this unique opportunity again very soon. Now, we also have 2 breaks during the day for coffee and lunch. And again, I urge you to use that time to network not just with panellists, but also with fellow audience members. I'm sure you'll all find a lot of common ground among those attending today's event. Apart from contributing on Twitter, as I said earlier, if you have any queries, you can approach the staff with the orange lanyards and they'll deal with any difficulties you may have. Now, one final comment. As I mentioned, we have an absolutely jam-packed agenda. So I'll be keeping a close watch on time, and I'll be giving speakers a 3-minute warning before they're due to conclude. Please don't interpret this as rudeness. It is actually essential to ensure that all speakers get their fair share of the time that they need to make their presentations and to keep the event running to schedule. So without further ado, I'd like to open our proceedings and set the context for today's deliberations by inviting Dr. Padraig Walsh to address us. Dr. Walsh's background is in chemical and biochemical engineering. In 2001, he was appointed as the first Director of Quality Promotion at Dublin City University. By 2005, he had become Chief Executive of the Irish University's Quality Board, and in 2012, he became Chief Executive of the bodies that merged to become Quality and Qualifications Ireland, QQI, who are our hosts today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Padraig Walsh.
Thanks very much, Ingrid, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to our conference on the Digitalisation Agenda, Rethinking the Role of Qualifications and Skills. When we announced this conference, as with any other event that you organise, you worry about what the level of interest might be. We shouldn't have worried, as we had to close the attendance list quite early, and it's great to see a good turnout this morning already. We hope that we'll be able to deliver on that vote of confidence by the provision of a stimulating forum for discussion and a wide variety of interesting presentations from national and international speakers from industry, education and training bodies, representative bodies, state agencies and government departments. Since our establishment, QQI has operated in a rapidly shifting domestic and international context. Being involved in qualifications, it's important that we stay attuned to significant developments in that area, but as custodians of the national framework of qualifications, we must also maintain stability where necessary and make decisions that are in the best interests of learners, society and the economy. The purpose of our conference today is to set out to understand the nature and extent of the opportunities and challenges for our education, training and qualification system presented by digitalisation. We want to use the national and international experience that we hear about today and the diverse audience that we've assembled to understand the potential implications, opportunities and challenges to the development and implementation of qualifications policy presented by digitalisation. We've therefore designed today's agenda around some key themes. The importance of the availability and accessibility of good quality of data and knowledge to inform policy making. But, as Nate Silver outlined in his best-selling book, The Signal and the Noise, increased access to information itself can sometimes do more harm than good. The more information that's available, the easier it is for people to cherry-pick it to support their pre-existing positions or to perceive patterns where there may be none. It's therefore important that the quality and the data and the quality of its analysis is paramount. Quality assurance is inextricably linked to the concepts of trust and confidence in qualifications and skills. The recognition of learner attainments through certification and qualifications relies on trusted systems for the collection, interpretation and exchange of student data. Nowadays, this includes the recognition and acceptance of e-portfolios, digital badges, and the concept of the data analytics of learning, or what we would term learning analytics. Another theme today will be the concepts of collaboration and partnership. In particular, the importance of the co-production of skills, the co-production of policy, the integration of work and education, the collaboration and partnership of education and training practitioners, policymakers and researchers. A further theme is the international dimension. Digitalisation respects no borders. International and transnational collaboration is essential. The sharing of knowledge, practice and experience is important. International perspectives can help ensure that domestic policy responses make a difference that matters to learners, be they students, employees or job seekers. A final theme is inequality. Digitalisation has the incredible power of democratising the accessibility to information. But we need to ensure that the design and effect of policy responses to digitalisation help to reduce rather than to increase levels of inequality. I would therefore like to thank the many speakers who are giving up their time today and my colleagues in QQI for their organisation of today's event, and in particular to thank John O'Connor and Beata Sokolowska in our Qualifications and Skills unit, who've put together an impressive programme of speakers that I'm sure will challenge and stimulate us for the day. I look forward to the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Padraig, for laying out the, if you like, the roadmap for the day. And I think that that's certainly an agenda that's going to challenge and stimulate all of us. Now, today's first module is going to look at the policy landscape underpinning recent developments in digitalisation as it applies to education, qualifications and skills. Our panel consists of three very educated people. Mary Doyle, Deputy Secretary General of the Department of Education and Skills, Stephen Brennan of the Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment, and William O'Keefe of the EU Commission's DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. Our first speaker is Mary Doyle, Deputy Secretary General of the Department of Education and Skills. Mary has an extensive background in both education and public administration. She worked in the departments of the Taoiseach and Health before taking up her current position in the Department of Education and Skills. Mary has been a member of the National Economic and Social Council, the National Statistics Board, and is currently a board member of Science Foundation Ireland. Now, Mary's going to look at digitalisation in the policy context of the broader national education landscape. And in her address, she'll explain how key departmental strategies and policies support national objectives to enhance digital capacity of all citizens as lifelong learners. Can I ask you to welcome Mary Doyle?
Good morning. Pleasure to be here. Can you hear me? Yes. And I wanted to thank the organisers of the event for inviting me, and I look forward to the opportunity to speaking on behalf of the department in terms of the policy issues which are relevant to this very important national agenda of digitalisation. And I think the opportunity to focus in particular on the area of qualifications and skills is tremendously important, because it's through these mediums that we will be rethinking the future, and we'll be making a different set of arrangements for the future for all of our population. So in looking at the programme for today and thinking about what I would say, I want in the first instance to congratulate the organisers on the depth and breadth of the issues that are being considered today, and also the speakers. So there are a number of speakers who are dealing with very important conceptual and theoretical issues. There are a number of speakers who will talk to you in more detail about the types of policies that the Department of Education and Skills has in place. And there are a number of speakers who will talk about the international agenda. So that's a very full and I think a very practical programme. So in thinking about what I would say in this introduction, I'd like to provide some context for the discussions by pointing to the challenges and opportunities that we in the education sector have in front of us right now. I'd like to highlight some of the measures being adopted by the department, and I'd like to reflect a little bit towards the end on the need for potentially a more joined up process in place right across the education sector to move this agenda forward, and some thoughts about how that could be done. So this is an interesting time for the education sector. I mean, in many ways it's great. We have significant demographic growth particularly in our school sector, but that's feeding through to our further and higher education sectors. And while it is putting pressure on the higher education sector in particular, and will do up to 2030, that's a very welcome pressure. The young people we have in our country, it's one of our greatest resources. And I suppose the juxtaposition of young people who are very digitally skilled, sitting in an education sector which is, I suppose it's fair to say, struggling a little bit to come to terms with the digitalisation agenda. It's going to be a very interesting dynamic over the next number of years, but it's really important because we have to think about how best to meet our current and future skill needs. That's a key driver of our economic growth. And we need to provide upskilling and reskilling to those already in the labour market, and that's a theme that I'll come back to later in my remarks. So we've quite a challenge ahead of us. As I say, we've got lots of young people. They're very skilled digitally, so we have to make sure that our system actually keeps up with them. Then we've people in the workforce or people who are unemployed who are not as skilled in these areas, and we've got to think about the policy context and the policy responses to meet their needs. So quite a complex and a challenging agenda. So where all this comes together is that unless all of this is carefully managed, there's going to be a strain on existing resources and on our infrastructure, and we're not going to be able to keep up even in the basic provision of infrastructure around ICT. QQI has commented in the past on the potential for quality in higher education, and we know that we have to keep this under constant review. And the challenge to us collectively, I guess, is to make the best use of the resources that we have, which are significant, and I'm just going to come to that now. Ireland makes a very significant investment in education. It's one of the things that we do, and that we do very well. In budget 2018, there was an additional €554 million allocated to education. So for the total education budget is now, for the first time, over 10 billion. So in anybody's money, that's a lot of billions. So there's a huge responsibility on all of us in the sector to spend this money, to spend it well, and to be good and nimble at anticipating the needs, and to think about the way that we provide services. So we need to think about opportunities to do things differently. As many of you in the room will know, we have an extensive programme of public sector reform currently underway, of which an important element is how to use digital technology more extensively and more effectively. So within the education sector, we've been trying to respond to the opportunities arising in a proactive way, but it is a pretty complex landscape, as again most of you know. So more specifically, in the classroom, there's a move towards a greater use of digital technology. In higher education, there's a greater use of digital technology for programme delivery. And today's conference allows us to reflect on where we are and think about the possibilities for the future. And as Padraig said, the three interrelated themes for the conference, I think, are very relevant to us as we try to think in a systematic way about the issue. So the first strand, the digitalisation and skills for work, is important, as is the second strand, the digital student data ecosystem, and also the third strand of digitalisation and teaching, learning and assessment. Each of these strands in their own right is a big theme. And sometimes when you come to look at big themes, we get lost in translation. So part of, I think, what could be really helpful today is the discipline of looking in a very structured way at each of those themes, doing the analysis of what's at issue, and then bringing them together at the end. We are, as you will all know, in the middle of, or maybe at the start of, the fourth industrial revolution, with developments in information technology, robotics, increasing automation of tasks, 3D printing and other innovations. They're all going to create new types of jobs, new sectors, new products, new services. They're also going to destroy jobs. They're going to require a different set of skills from people right across the world. And the advances that are being made, particularly in artificial intelligence, not only are they very significant, but they're very rapid. This is going to happen very quickly. So it's good that we're thinking about what they will look like as best we know, and how we will meet the challenge. That pace of change is unprecedented, and there's going to be a lot of disruption. And the world will be different. I recently read an article on the future of work in which one commentator said, there's actually a competitive advantage in being human. And so when you kind of think about that, you think, oh yeah, but what that actually means is that the skills that technology isn't so good at, like social and emotional intelligence, will be a competitive advantage for humans, because the machines will do lots of the other work. So trying to think our way around that and prepare for it, it's a huge challenge. It's likely that the number of people working in non-standard complex jobs is going to increase. It's likely that the rate of change of career and expertise by one person right across their working age is going to change. People are going to move between jobs. They always did that. They're probably going to move between sectors, and we know that there are jobs going to be created that we can't even imagine at the moment. So there is a real onus and responsibility on policymakers to try to start thinking about this in a much more systematic way, and today is part of that. So I just want to turn in particular to one theme, which is the third theme I mentioned, the implications of digitalisation for teaching, learning and assessment. And I just want to highlight in my remarks that this is a particular priority for the department, because the need for quality education is ever more important, because we need to make sure that working with learners, not giving them stuff, but working with learners, meeting their needs, equip them with the right skills, knowledge and qualifications to meet the kind of demands I've just set out. We've set ourselves as a country ambitious target to have the best education and training service in Europe within a decade. So if that's going to happen, we have to be a front runner in using digital technology, and that will require, I think, a significant step change from where we are at the moment, as most of you in the room will know that. I mean, we've used the National Skills Strategy to emphasise that improved digital skills would be vital for Ireland's future, not just in the higher end ICT jobs, but much more widely as a basic competence. A key theme of the 2017 Action Plan for Education is again the enhanced use of digital technology. So I just want to spend a little time this morning highlighting some of the key measures and initiatives that are currently being progressed by the department. And then when I've done that, I want to just spend a little time in thinking not just about the individual initiatives, but how they actually connect right across the system. Because we tend to see our system in pieces. We tend to see the school system, the further education training sector, and the higher education sector. And we see them as separate. And we have to find ways of connecting them all because, as you know, it's a continuum. So our policy responses at the moment are very much based in the individual sector. So at primary and post-primary level, we have the Digital Strategy for Schools, sets out a programme to further embed ICT technology and digital learning tools in schools. And there's a really important agenda behind that, which is to so that Ireland's young people can become engaged thinkers, active learners, knowledge constructors, and global citizens. And they're going to need to have all of those skills to participate fully in society and the economy. Last month, Minister Bruton launched the Digital Learning Framework for Schools, and that's one of the key supports envisaged in the digital strategy. And the framework provides a roadmap to help all schools to improve their digital capability and manage the transformation of teaching and learning as a result of the new technologies. So how will it work? So it's designed to help schools and teachers to plan how to upskill to realise the potential of digital technologies. It's designed to provide for internal and external evaluation of how digital technologies are being embedded across all aspects of school activity. And it's designed to support planning in areas like literacy, numeracy and STEM, which require a cross-curricular focus. My colleague Eddie Ward will be talking to you about the strategy and the framework in more detail later in the afternoon, so I won't go into it in any more detail. But I would say that we need to make sure that all our policies and supports focus at the cutting edge, which in this case, where does it transact? Well, it transacts in schools, and it transacts between the learner, the teacher, and the managers of the school. So we have to take, I think, a much broader view of how we see things transacting. So rather than frameworks and policies coming down from on high, we have to find a way to have a better conversation with those who are, as I say, actually doing the work in the classroom with learners who have the experience and can probably tell more than anybody about what needs to be done in this area. So that's right, okay. So in the further education and training sector, we're working with Solace to implement the strategy for technology enhanced learning in further education. There's 18 practical actions and associated timelines and indicators in that area. And again, there's a range of activities, including learning plans, the development of a bring your own device policy, and the development of a content sharing and management infrastructure. And Mary Liz Trant from Solace will be here later in the afternoon, so again, I won't go into that in detail, but again, these initiatives are designed to help learners and teachers to become more skilled and confident in using technology. And in the higher education and training sector, this is a major strategic priority for the department. The rising demographics means that we face increasing demand for higher education, and we need to upskill and reskill the workforce. New technologies have the potential to enhance quality learning and teaching in our institutions. And as Padraig said, they also have the potential for widening access to higher education and increasing the diversity of the student population. But that's not going to happen by accident. And unless we're careful and we join up all the pieces, actually people will get left behind, and we know who these people are. So part of our policy challenge is to make sure that that doesn't happen. The main vehicle for development in higher education is the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning, which has published a roadmap for enhancement in a digital world 2015 to 2017, and sets out a set of objectives and practical supports to move this agenda forward. One of the major challenges facing higher education is finding a way to harness ever-increasing digital capacity to enhance student learning. And I know that Lee O'Farrell will be talking to you later today in relation to the learning analytics element. This is really, really important. And again, it's kind of, unless we see it as a core element of this agenda, it will sit in the margins and we won't realise its potential. It's a really exciting project, and I certainly look forward to this talk later on. So in conclusion, as policymakers, we're exploring means of incentivising the use of digital technologies right across our education system. In higher education in particular, just to say, a review of the existing funding model has just been completed. And one of the things that I would expect to come from that review is that it will incentivise action in this area. It will identify the potential for strengthening links between funding and the use of digital technology for teaching and learning in the future. Before I go, I'd just like to say a couple of things that I think are relevant to the work of the conference. I've tried, as you can see, to outline the challenges facing us all, but also to give an overview of the responses that are in place. And as I said earlier, we need to join up those responses in a much more systematic way. And hopefully we will be able to do that, and this conference will make an important contribution to that. I'd like to finish by thanking Padraig and the team in QQI for the opportunity to be here today. And I think it's appropriate to note that this is an exciting time for QQI itself as an organisation. We in the department are working with QQI to introduce new legislation to strengthen its role as a regulator in further and higher education. So when enacted, the Qualifications Amendment Bill, which I hope will be enacted in 2018, will bring benefits to QQI and to the institutions that it regulates, and will help us to position this agenda of today's conference in that legislative and policy space in a much stronger way. It's very encouraging to see so many of you here today from so many different organisations, because as I said at the beginning, this is a complex agenda. We all have our part to play, and it's really good that we have the chance to talk to each other today, and can I thank QQI for that. Thanks indeed.
Thank you very much, Mary, for opening this module. Our next speaker is Dr. Stephen Brennan of the Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment. Stephen is currently Chief Digital Advisor to the Irish Government and authored Ireland's National Digital Strategy. He's a member of the Irish Government's Retail Forum, as well as the EU Commission Member States Board on Digital Entrepreneurship. Now, according to his biographical notes for this conference, he was inspired to develop the flagship Irish Government Digital Enterprise Initiative, that's the trading online voucher scheme, while sitting on a broken down tractor in Cavan. And I'm guessing that that is the first time that tractors have been mentioned in the context of the digital revolution. Stephen will examine the impact that digital is having on Irish society and the economy. He'll focus on change, the pace of transition, and the key drivers that are likely to impact on the future. And he's also going to address some digital policy questions and connect this high-level perspective with the digital skills requirement by people younger and older, inside and outside education and work. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Stephen Brennan.
Also click on the presentation. Just click and it's your slide.
Great, okay. It would have been embarrassing for the digital guy not to figure out how to move the slides forward. So good morning, and again, thank you to the organisers for the opportunity to come and speak with you today, even though I'm tethered to this podium and I can't address the audience over that side, so I'll hopefully get you to put your hands up and stuff a little bit later on. What I want to do is to follow on very nicely from Mary's presentation. Where'd you go? Oh, there you go. And try to give you some facts and figures. So first of all, an acknowledgement that I am a physicist and mathematician, so in God we trust, and in everything else we need data, so I need to throw a few numbers up at you. I wanted to sort of illustrate to you that digital, the reason that this conference was and is so well attended and great excitement around it is digital is hot. Somebody said that to me this morning, and this is sort of why. More than half of the global population is connected to the internet. And if you just think about it, about 10 years ago, if we were standing here, nobody would ever have heard of social media. That's how fast it's moving. I have an email from my last job from the IDA telling me that, and no embarrassment for anybody here, but telling me that there's 2 people coming from Facebook to have a look at some offices in Dublin, and could we have a chat with them? That was only about 10 years ago. I'm not that old at this. Okay? So things are moving quickly, and it's a very significant proportion of the world that's connected. The next thing, and I think this is important for you as people interested in skills, the next billion consumers that we put on top of those billions I showed you earlier on will never connect to the internet with anything other than a device like this. No PCs, no switching on, no operating system, no browser, never even heard of it. App, button, go. And I think that's something I want to come back to later on, because the pace at which and our ability to connect with people and technology, how we use it and how we benefit from it, technology is making it easier, more intuitive, more human. There's always a role for humans, Mary, always a role for humans. And I'll show you that later on. But the reality is that the technology will work to try and coalesce with where we want to be. In Ireland, we are very digital. Can I just ask a question of the audience? Did any of you travel here and use an app to look at the traffic or to get a bus time? Put up the hands. A bus. Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. Down your hands. 5 years ago, did any of you use any of those things? You did. One Uber nerd like myself, but other than that. Now, my next question to you is, how did you learn how to do it? Somebody told you, right? I have 2 teenage boys. They tell me everything. Dad, that's not how you do it. This is how you do it. Okay? So we're learning from each other. We're discovering. Discovery, I think, is a theme that I keep coming back to over and over again. The ability to discover. And therefore, I live in super rural Ireland, and unless I learn how to do things or fall upon somebody who's got a new app, I don't naturally discover it in rural Cavan. So that ability to discover things. The other thing I wanted to show you is that it's not all teenage young people. Internet is highly pervasive right across the spectrum. And the other thing is it's getting more and more productive. Is there anybody from the Department of Finance or Revenue here? Let's tell the truth then. 1 in every 7 of us is making money on the internet today. 1 in every 7. Privately on Done Deal. Anybody use Done Deal? Yeah? A huge fan of Done Deal, right? And all those sorts of abilities to sell the thing you were. So this idea of being productive on the internet is beginning to take hold and become a very natural thing for us. And this is why I have a profound issue with various mechanical objects. My tractor broke down. I had a plumbing incident about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the first thing I did was I needed a plumber. So I went on the internet to tradesman.ie, apologies, and I put my job up. And I had 3 or 4 plumbers apply for the job and give me a quote. Has anybody used these things before? Yeah, how did you pick how did you pick the plumber? Price, reviews, yeah, that's how I did it. Now, it was pretty important for the plumber, self-employed individual, to have a device, to have a connection, and to have the ability to be able to address that job opportunity. That wasn't the traditional skills that we might have experienced before. And how we're learning, how we're discovering, how we're trusting, and how we're being influenced to make decisions all the time. How many of you were influenced in what bus you got, what route you took? These are things that are pervasive in your lives and gradually changing how infrastructure technology impacts what we do, and therefore, if we're providing those things, how we're to do it. The reality is that digital is also not a thing separate from the bulk of the rest of us. We're not an Uber sort of people that sit in a corner and invent things and build gadgets and so on. The vast majority of impact, McKinsey looked at this right across many economies in the world, the vast majority of the impact of digital is in the traditional economy. It's in the places that we all experience, the things that we all do. And that means that if you begin to think about our traditional view of a high-value knowledge economy, and Mary mentioned Germany, for example, with Industry 4.0, it's a great example of traditionally we invest in many PhDs and many masters, and we give special equipment to special people. They invent things. Those things get developed, they percolate into market, and so on. That's our traditional view of the knowledge economy. Digital, in my view, turns the potential upside down. The ubiquity of digital, the fact that so many of us in this room used it today to get here on time, how many of us engage with it to make our aircraft work and our hospitals better, and all of those things, the pervasiveness is really where the power of digital begins to take shape. So we don't necessarily have that many super users. We have lots of users, and they discover, create, connect, and develop. They discover, they learn. So in my world, the digital world, we think of the knowledge economy as something different. It's the ubiquity that's important to us. And the next thing I would say is it's the productivity of that ubiquity. Terrible English, sorry. But for many of us, we start by consuming digital. So for example, I would be a very avid consumer of content on the internet, okay? So the next question becomes, at what point do I get inspired to produce something? And that's something that I see happening in schools more and more and more, where little kids in the classroom are perfectly capable of taking a video, making a song, and then publishing, producing, being productive. And that moves towards being able to do lots of other clever and dynamic things, usually in collaboration with each other. But our main objective, I think, for the future has got to be to provide a ubiquity of capability and to make that capability not passive but productive. And here is where Mary and I would agree very much. It's the unique creativity of Ireland that brings a new dimension to that productivity. I hang out a lot with our European partners, the Finnish and the Germans and the Dutch and so on. And I can tell you we have an opportunity here. It to be creatively productive, to do things in a cool, sophisticated, human, connected way using digital is a real opportunity for Ireland and a place where we can develop new jobs. Digital adoption is supporting new businesses, that's the digital space. It's supporting the existing things that we do every day, and 75 or 80% of digital's impact is going to be there, but it has incredible opportunity to unlock creative potential. Sitting in the middle of nowhere in Cavan, with this phone, I can achieve a great deal because I have the world in my pocket. That's something that we couldn't do before. This is something that I've borrowed from Nokia. I've talked about people change. These slides are available to you, by the way. I know I'm whistling through them very quickly, but this is something I've looked at. You'll notice over time some of the brands you recognize. Google is in there, and Skype, and MySpace should be in there somewhere. But you see things like WhatsApp, you're using that now. Spotify, Dropbox, yeah, we're all using some of these applications. And then as we move over to the far side of the curve, we begin to get into plain text, because we get into some of the things that Mary was talking about, artificial intelligence, robotics, blockchain. These are all emerging technologies, yet to be won by the marketplace. But the point that the slide is trying to make is that up to now, many of the things we use Google for, the maps for, it fits into our lives. It's something that augments the things that we do in a constructive way. These new advancements, Internet of Things, data analytics, artificial intelligence, robotics, these are going to have a change. These are going to impact us because it's going to displace something else. And this is where some of the data I think you referred to earlier on, Mary, this is some of this is an older slide from the research in Oxford, just looking at the impacts. And what it basically says is the more human, the more connected, the more social the roles, the less potentially impacted they are. But the question is whether we can continue to simply replace, or whether we need to look at how these structures, the things that we do, how we do them, the way we work, the way we discover, and the way we gain our skills can blend with the inevitable development of the technologies and allow us to continue to have a role. I think inevitably the workforce is going to change. Inevitably, many of us in our dotage may not necessarily do a 5-day week, but the work that we do will be highly productive and highly social. And for me, the biggest thing is it is essentially an adaptive change that we're talking about. Adaptive changes are very difficult because we have to change our attitudes, our processes. It's the human part. Technology we can fix. We know how to make things quicker, faster, slower, smaller. The people bit is the bit, and that is the journey that we have to go on as policymakers. We need to allow our citizenry to engage in a conversation with us, to understand the changes that are going to take place, to understand that some of the types of work that traditionally have been the mainstay of our economy are going to evolve. It's skills and collaboration. Data is something that we can do as technologists. So for me, the speed and magnitude in which policy is evolving and developing, I think focusing at citizens, public sector, and private sector in tandem is something that it's something that's going to be very prevalent for us in digital. And the one of the things that we need to think about now as policymakers is a lot of the work that we've done in digital so far has been on pilots and relatively small scale work. Now we need to get pervasive. We need to get ubiquity in what we do. A couple of quick examples of things that have nothing to do on the surface with skills, but everything to do with skills. Here's the tractor, by the way, guys, and it's rather shiny in that photograph. But trading online is an interesting one. Its job as a policy intervention was to help small businesses trade online, right? So everybody that turns up to the mandatory half-day training, owner managers and so on, think that they have to build an app. We spend half a day with them. We explain the rudiments of what a search is and what a Facebook is and all those sort of things. They go away and they go, I can do this. I can take the first step. The key thing is the success of this scheme, which, by the way, tens of thousands of businesses have taken part in, is the skills. It's the half day, here's what we need to do, 1, 2, 3, then go away and do it by yourself. That's the key. The next one I just wanted to highlight in my last slide is that there is a lot of work going on in terms of providing basic skills to the part of the population that doesn't use the internet very much. But quite amazingly, even with very little intervention, very little support, the discovery of what's possible, primarily on this easy-to-use device, the productivity of people rises rapidly. And importantly and interestingly, so many people learn to buy and sell on done deal that it's become a little industry all in itself. I wanted to leave it there. There's my contact details. I hope it's given you some context for some of the things that are going on, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Some of the figures there are very interesting in terms of who's included, who's not, the amount of the training interventions. So I think a lot of that will feed into our discussions later on. Right now, I'm going to call on our next speaker, who is William O'Keefe of the European Commission's Directorate for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. William's a policy officer in the Skills and Qualifications unit there, and he oversees work on Europass and other tools supporting the understanding of skills and qualifications in Europe. Now, William was seconded as a national expert from our hosts today, Quality and Qualifications Ireland, where he worked on topics including international education, recognition of qualifications and validation. Now, in today's address, William's going to outline key European initiatives to foster learning and mobility within the digital single market. And he's going to be looking at how we can ensure that people have the required skills to thrive in the digital world with its new ways of living and working. He's also going to look at how those negatively affected by changes in the workplace will be handled. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome William O'Keefe.
Morning. Thank you to QQI for having me back for the day. Normally, when I'm introduced, and as Stephen whispered in my ear at the beginning, I have the longest title here, and I've learned over the last 2 years to not always presume that people know what this means. The Commission is the policy initiator, the researcher, the funder, the evaluator, and then the implementer subsequently. Everything really except the legislative elements. We get our mandate from the European Council, which is our ministers and prime ministers, and then the Parliament, which is our MEPs we elect every 5 years. And really, the directorate is one of over 20 directorates across the Commission, with a various breakdown of different portfolios along traditional lines and a few unique to the Commission. And really this topic of digitalisation is everywhere. It's prioritised, and one of the bigger ideas of Europe being a digital single market. And then the topic of digitalisation and digital skills is incentivised, funded, prioritised, and it is a strand really of every policy and programme. So to start small, I just want to introduce you to this idea of Coder Dojo. So Coder Dojo was an initiative that was started in Dublin back in 2013, and basically it's funded by Erasmus+, manned by volunteers, and it started out with teaching 7 to 11-year-olds coding skills. And really it's grown legs, it's manned by volunteers, and it's grown legs internationally so that it's now operating in over 60 countries. So really, I'm not starting with an anecdote for the sake of it. This was actually the highlight that was included in the Europe's Digital Progress Report Card, which looks specifically at Ireland. And it highlighted this example as being a case of how Ireland is innovating the types of projects that are funded at EU level and then multiply, kind of get ingrained and develop. And of course, this idea of coding, however complicated or debatable it may be in terms of how we're education and training young people, is more and more becoming part of the rhetoric and the discussions around basic digital skills. The same report found that Ireland is actively monitoring skills challenges, actively addressing skills gaps, taking an evidence-based approach, and actively engaging with stakeholders. So the criteria for this evaluation, this summary, mostly positive, looked at how this idea of human capital and the way that we're developing basic and advanced digital skills in Ireland. You know, these basic skills that are becoming more and more essential, and these advanced skills that are really necessary for us to be a competitive, innovative economy. Within the context of this, I think we need an objective, and certainly within my unit, the Skills and Qualifications unit, those two terms, the same terms on the agenda today, really capture everything about these transitions between the worlds of employment, education and training, and the goals of lifelong learning. So I have these ambitions in there. And within that context, we're talking about skills and qualifications today. So these building blocks, you know, they're the topics we're going to be talking about today, and they're also the topics of interest to the Commission. These are the pieces that we pull together and try and engage with when we're dealing with topics of skills and qualifications within our unit and how we address this issue of digitalisation. The thing with qualifications and skills, to follow the format, the title of the agenda, is that the topics aren't changing. The topics, when we look at the EU 28, the issues around them, these old chestnuts, they're not necessarily moving on. We still have long conversations and initiatives around skills developments, the how and the where and the why of teaching the relevant skills, recognition of qualifications, the mobility of qualifications, information on qualifications, and how you can have your qualifications recognised in one country, in different companies, in different settings, And the same idea with the recognition of skills. The topic validation was there in the introduction. That's the EU speak for this idea of recognition of prior learning. And it's more and more important than ever, giving this idea of giving visibility to different types of skills. Information on skills and qualifications. How are we making policy decisions? How are we understanding trends and patterns and emerging priorities and needs when it comes to issues of skills and qualifications? And finally, these ambitions, these goals of education, training, and lifelong learning. These are still the topics, these are still the priorities. When the Commission has given its mandate, these are the issues that we need to address. But in each case, each of them, the conversation and the possibilities around each of them is shifting. And like Ingrid said at the beginning, we're going to be introduced today to buzzwords and scary terms and new digital tools. But each of these, the Commission is becoming more and more aware of them. We're being lobbied on them, getting submissions on them. Projects and funding are all linked to these types of topics. Really with skills development, like Stephen, when he held up his phone, if you have a phone, you can learn. If you have a phone, you can access a learning opportunity. If you have a phone, you can access a business opportunity or new routes to skills. With the recognition of qualifications, digitalisation really is bringing us so far beyond the point of paper. It's not even worth talking about anymore. There's micro-credentials, everything is digitalised. Open badges are digital tools for carrying the information on your qualifications with you everywhere. And blockchain is a term we're hearing more and more, a secure online digital way of exchanging information on qualifications. In the same way with the recognition of skills, we're seeing more and more tools that are emphasizing the visibility of skills acquired in lots and lots of different settings, you know, the non-formal, informal words that we have here in our education and training speak. Out in the world of digital tools, there's e-portfolios, reviews from peers, endorsements like we would see in LinkedIn. These are becoming the terms and the language and the ways in which people are talking about skills and experiences and wanting to give visibility to them. And of course, it's all happening online and happening instantly. With information on skills and qualifications, data is the big term, the free flow of information that we operate in a semantic web, which basically means the internet is full of information. And how are we going to use it? How are we going to capture it and understand it to inform policy decisions? And really, if the pace of change is so instant, how are we going to be ready for it? How will we use this information to inform our choices and actions? And when it comes to education, training, and lifelong learning, the individual, our ultimate beneficiary, the citizen, the lifelong learner, there are more and more tools emerging on how they're exploring interests, self-assessing their own skills, managing their careers, and certainly emerging within the guidance sector, more and more discussion of this idea of a career management competence, and that just within that there has to be basic digital skills. So certainly this isn't going to spiral into a tech talk. This is just to say that the Commission has been confronted with these topics more and more. And the Commission, like many of the people in the room, is the public sector. The public sector is always behind. It's just the nature of it. But these ideas are being captured and being used in so many other parts of the market. And in the examples we see, in the submissions and the projects and the presentations, there's huge positive potential. But of course, we need to get to grips with it, and we need to understand it and use it in an effective way. So to get into some brass tacks, some examples of what the Commission is doing, I need to start with the typical caveat. When it comes to education and training, this is a competence of the Member States. So it's effectively hands-off when it comes to the content of teaching and learning. So really the role of the Commission is to be a facilitator, support networks, bring people together. This idea of the Qualification and Skills Agenda brings together people from lots of different sectors. The main bulk of our work is on facilitating cooperation between member states and stakeholders, the tools and services that can, again, stimulate conversation and cooperation, and of course, the money. So I won't talk too much about the money today, but really there's, I think one of the main purposes of me being here today is just to bring these pieces of information to you and then, encourage you to get on these mailing lists, get on these visit the DG Employment and the Commission websites, because there's huge amounts of projects going on, the types of things that got Coder Dojo established, and they grow legs, there's potential, there's expertise, and there's networks there. So really do make sure you're engaging with that piece and aware of it, because I think it's relevant to everyone in the room. Our largest policy package came out last October, and it was called the New Skills Agenda for Europe. And when you get the presentation, the link on the top will bring you to the relevant webpage. It was built around these three key planks of ensuring the quality and relevance of skills, visibility and comparability of skills, and information around choices and education and training choices. I'm not going to go through each of these today, but really, digitalization is either an element of them or it influences each of these actions. Number one there was a recommendation that became known as the upskilling pathways, in which each of the member states committed to enabling adult learners over 25 who didn't have an upper secondary qualification, the Leaving Cert in our case, to have an opportunity to have a tailored assessment of their skills and a new learning offer to bring them up to an upper secondary school qualification. And within that, one of the key things to be assessed was digital skills. In column 2, you would look at the revision of the EQF. There was a new recommendation drafted that sought to enable start a conversation about what the next steps should be for the European Qualifications Framework as a tool to enable comparability of qualifications in different areas and regions. And it was trying to be a forward-looking, future-proof recommendation that looked at the fact that learning is opening up, qualifications and learning and education is becoming borderless, and how can a tool like the EQF help us? And then an initiative like the initiative in graduate tracking, another recommendation that's almost been agreed at EU policy level, whereby there's going to be a shared single process across the EU for collecting information on higher education and further education graduates, and the information and their experiences, the relevance and the usability of their qualifications afterwards. And of course, the capturing of this information, the capturing of these survey results will all be determined, or all be influenced and enabled by digital technology and the free flow of information and data. I want to pick up just a few of these and kind of capture, touch on these ideas of the stakeholders, the evidence, and just enabling education and training and lifelong learning. One of the actions within the agenda is a review of what's called the 2006 Key Competence Framework. So again, this is the Commission trying to facilitate dialogue, exchange of views, common understanding, and ensure, facilitate and support consistent development of what's known as key competences, these key building blocks that you need for employability, lifelong learning, success, participation in society. And back in 2006, there was again a political level document agreed amongst the member states of what are the definitions and understandings and descriptions of these 8 key competences that you could take and adapt to national curricula, education and training programs, upskilling programs. And this now is being reviewed 10 or 11 years later. Is it fit for purpose? Is it up to date? Does it reflect the modernization and digitalization? As you'll see within one of the 8, we have this idea of a digital competence. And you'll note I've shifted to the word competence rather than skills, because we try and emphasize that this is a broader concept. I generally try and summarize it as competences are for life. So as a spin-off from the Key Competence Framework, the Commission has developed a tool called DigComp, the Digital Competence Framework for Citizens. I will never know why we didn't call it DigiComp, but it's DigComp. And this is intended to be a building block, a tool, a reference framework, again, for understanding digital skills. If you want to get to grips with this concept and answer the question, what are digital skills? This is intended as an enabler. So it starts with high-level key concepts of 5 key areas to what make up digital skills. Behind that, there's 21 individual competences. Behind that, there's descriptors, which could enable description of learning outcomes. And then also it's mapped across 8 levels of proficiency. So there's a huge amount of information behind it. I just have this one slide here today. And it's an example of a tool that we would encourage use on. Really, it's being used in professional development, education, training content, in the employment sector and in the policy development sector. And you'll note here Ireland isn't on the map yet today, but I just want to make sure that there's just lots of different examples of it across the Union. So really do have a look at that. So the next example is an example of this idea of collaboration, the Commission bringing together stakeholders from across different sectors to have conversations about what are digital skills, how do we develop them, what should be the content of them and the priorities of them for different users. I know the Irish Computer Society is here today, who are directly involved with the Digital Skills and Jobs Coalition, so I won't go into too much of the detail, but this is one of the typical things that the Commission would do, and it opens it up. This type of initiative is open up to pledges from different companies, participation from a range of different organisations and stakeholders, and it's about having conversations at national level, specific to national contexts, on the future of digital skills. And as you see, there's various it has an ambition to make sure that we're constantly upskilling and addressing this issue of digital skills shortages. And also there's a new digital opportunity scheme linked to it, where there's been funding made available for the next 2 years as part of a pilot for digital internships, funded internships for graduates and students in specific sectors to acquire digital skills in new and emerging sectors. Moving on to this last piece, this idea of evidence, and we've heard the idea of data analytics, and I mentioned the semantic web and just this free flow of information. And of course, as we mentioned, in the private sector, this ability, it's been captured, it's being explored. Our interests, our purchases, our lifestyle, it's all been captured through big data. And of course, we need to have the conversation about what can we do when it comes to skills, qualifications, the emerging trends, and the fact that there's an internet full of information on vacancies, learning opportunities, degrees. And one of the Commission tools that's getting to grips with this is called the EU Skills Panorama. So it's a specific portal run by a CEDEFOP, a Commission agency based in Thessaloniki. And it's starting to bring together information on skills intelligence, capturing the raw data at national level and also coming from the OECD and the ILO, and turning it into coherent, comprehensive messages. So there's information in here on new and emerging trends in sectors, different countries, different occupations, and it's trying to make it intelligible and useful. And one of the things I'm most interested in is the next phase of work, where they're going to start targeting information at guidance practitioners and guidance professionals, because ultimately this is the type of information that could be built around informing education and training choices and indicating to people where the emerging trends are and responding to their interests, but also letting them know what types of skills and learning opportunities to prioritise.
I can ask you to wrap up soon.
So this is just back to the original idea. I mentioned there's a rich agenda today, and I'm happy to share these pieces of information with you. Things like DigComp, we really want to see. We're going to be planning over the next 18 months of what we do with it, so I hope to learn from all of you here today. And of course, these are the building blocks within which the Commission is taking our work forward. And I don't have cards with me, unfortunately, but my email address is here, so please feel free to email me at any stage. Thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank William and our other speakers, Mary and Stephen, for what I think you'll all agree have been very, very informative contributions